In the late 19th century, Western scholars noted the prevalence of a certain character archetype in indigenous American mythology that ethnologist Daniel Brinton called the trickster. Various thinkers have since expanded on the concept, identifying tricksters in nearly every ancient and indigenous culture on Earth. Since then, some have also noted the trickster's connections to the supernatural, or the paranormal. While the meaning of trickster tales remains hotly debated, some scholarship suggests that the trickster may, in part, be a coded representation of anomalous phenomena. The tricksters of mythology are almost always male, though they are often depicted in the form of certain animals, or animal-human hybrids. They are shapeshifters, and frequently inhabit other forms as needed. Tricksters possess great supernatural powers, and often serve important roles in creation myths and other origin stories, while also mediating between different realms. They can play heroes, villains, or agents of chaos. One thing common to nearly all of the world's tricksters is their cunning, and their use of wit and wiles to compensate for lack of status or brawn. Tricksters exhibit a range of behaviors that violate social norms and moral codes. They lie, cheat, and manipulate, and they engage in a lot of impulsive behaviors. Tricksters are often gluttonous and have a high sexual libido, leading them to engage in promiscuous and even predatory sexual behavior. They can also be foolish buffoons, and many tales involve comical, grotesque, and scatological elements. The ancient Greek god Hermes, or Mercury in Roman mythology, is considered an archetypal trickster god. On the day he was born, he stole cattle from his brother Apollo, then concealed his tracks and lied about it. He was stealthy and used both wiles and magic to operate unnoticed. Hermes was also the messenger between realms, tasked with accompanying human souls down to Hades, guiding them across the primordial boundary between life and death. He was also described as being an aggressive seducer of women. In Native American tradition, the trickster most often takes the form of a coyote or a raven. One of the more common trickster stories in Native American traditions has to do with the origin of fire. In the Ute tradition, Coyote steals fire from a foreign people who are guarding it for themselves, and shows his own people how to keep it in their teepees. In many creation stories too, Coyote teaches humans how to catch salmon, and builds the first weir, a dam for trapping fish. These stories illustrate Trickster's role as a culture hero, or one who changes human life for the better. But Coyote and other tricksters could also be adversarial and cruel, even in their roles as creators. A myth of the Maidu people in modern-day California holds that Coyote helped create the world with a primal being called the Earthmaker, only to sabotage many of his creations. For example, while Earthmaker wanted to give humans the ability to revive their dead, Coyote intervened to make death permanent. Though Earthmaker tried to destroy Coyote with the help of his human creations, Coyote outwits them all, thus displaying his comparable powers. Tricksters also engage in many sociopathic and often murderous actions. In the Winnebago tradition, the trickster god Wakjunkaga tricks two mother raccoons into abandoning their children, then cooks and eats the youngsters before placing one's head on the end of a stick and setting it at the door for its mother to find. Later, he kills the mothers too to eat their flesh. Anansi, the trickster god of the Akan people of West Africa, often took the form of a spider and used his cunning to manipulate others to his personal advantage. The Krache people of Ghana say that Anansi promised the supreme sky god Wabari that he'd bring him 100 slaves if granted a single cob of corn. After destroying the cob and lying about it, Anansi emotionally blackmails some villagers into giving him their own sacks of corn. He then repeats the process, manipulating people and trading the rewards until he returns to Walbari with 100 slaves and is appointed chief of his host. One of the most popular African trickster tales involves the Yoruba god Eshu, mediator between humans, gods, and evil spirits. Eshu makes himself a hat that is white on one side and black on the other, then rides his horse directly between two good friends who are working on opposite ends of a field. Having seen different sides, the friends get into a fight over the color of the hat, and nearly come to blows when Eshu intervenes. He tells the men that they were both right in their interpretation, and advises them to reckon with Eshu in their dealings with one another, or to accept that there are multiple interpretations to all human interactions. In Japan, the Kitsune is a fox spirit who plays tricks on people, often to humiliate the selfish or the boastful. Many Kitsune stories involve a young man being seduced by a fox in the form of a human woman. The earliest extant foxwife story, contained in the 9th century Nihon Ryoiki, involves a man marrying a foxwife and having a child with her. At the same time, the family dog has a puppy who sees through her disguise and frightens her into changing back into a fox and running away, leaving the father and child forever. While the motives and behaviors of trickster figures vary greatly around the world, they overlap in their in-between and boundary-crossing nature, their subversion of social norms, and their manipulative use of cunning and deceit. Tricksters disrupt people's experiences of normal life, and help to forge a new social reality, if only temporarily. The abstracted concept of the trickster was a creation of Western scholars. The term was introduced in an 1885 article by the American historian and ethnologist, Daniel Brinton. Brinton observed that many indigenous American gods were morally ambivalent, and were described as creators and heroes, while simultaneously being described as cheaters, liars, and fools. Attempting to rationalize the apparent contradiction, Brinton hypothesized that the devious, buffoonish dimension of the trickster in Algonquin mythology was a corruption of earlier tales of a noble deity of light. The German-American anthropologist, Franz Boas, adopted Brinton's term in the preface to a book in 1898. Boas disagreed with Brinton's thesis that the buffoonish elements of trickster tales were late corruptions. Instead, he theorized that these tales evolved over time from stories of gluttonous, impulsive fools to stories of culture heroes who consciously acted in humanity's best interests. In 1956, the American anthropologist and folklorist, Paul Radin, published The Trickster, a book that explored the trickster tales told by the Winnebago people of the Midwest. Radin believed that the trickster represented humanity's collective memory of an earlier, more primitive psychic state still in the process of differentiation, a psychological term for defining a sense of self apart from the outside world. In Radin's words, trickster represented not only the undifferentiated and distant past, but likewise the undifferentiated present within every individual. Radin's book included an essay by the psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung. Jung noted the animalistic quality of tricksters and viewed these figures as amalgams of our lowest consciousness behaviors. He wrote that the trickster is a collective shadow figure, a summation of all the inferior traits of character in individuals, that he described as having been solidified into a mythological personage. The figure is split off from the observer's consciousness, and thus behaves like a distinct autonomous being. To Jung, trickster tales are a way of creating a conscious relationship to this unconscious state, and thus reducing its power over the psyche. Since the middle of the 20th century, scholars have generally abandoned attempts to reconcile the contradictory elements of trickster tales, instead embracing paradox as a fundamental part of the stories. In the 1970s, American folklorist Barbara Babcock-Abrahams argued that the trickster embodies the fundamental contradiction of our existence, the contradiction between the individual and society, between freedom and constraint. Using the anthropologist Mary Douglas's concept of the peripheral, Babcock-Abrahams argued that the trickster represented, in part, the collective dirt of a society, or all of the rejected negative elements of character that a society defines itself against. The Chippewa professor of Native American Studies, Gerald Vizenor, commented on the trickster in the late 1980s. Drawing insights from semiotics, post-colonialism, and deconstructuralism, Vizenor argued that we should view the trickster as a comic discourse. Through the recitation of trickster tales, readers and listeners were able to engage their imaginations in a language game steeped in paradox and contradiction. Doing so allowed both listeners and readers to imagine their liberation and to question the very realities that govern their existence. In Visionor's words, "The trickster is a sign, and the world is deconstructed in a discourse." In 1988, Henry Louis Gates Jr., a professor of African American studies at Harvard University, devised a method of literary analysis informed by African trickster tales. Gates explored tales of Eshu, or Eshu Elegbara, and their survival in African American tales of the signifying monkey, and argues that they were symbolic of the creative potential and the indeterminacy of interpretation of African American oral and literary traditions. Many more have commented on the trickster since, including Lewis Hyde and Emily Zobel Marshall. Western scholarship is still exploring the many meanings within the world's trickster tales, and what effect they might have on those who tell them. One of the first Western scholars to acknowledge the connection between the trickster and anomalous phenomena was the German psychologist Lutz Müller. In a 1981 article, Müller noted the fact that both psi phenomena and the trickster defied boundaries and shared many other characteristics, including self-contradiction, incomprehensibility, and spontaneity. He argued that one could only move towards an understanding of psi phenomena if one approached them with a trickster consciousness. Alan Combs and Mark Holland published a book in 1990 that explored the connection between the trickster archetype and Jung's concept of synchronicity. Jung defined synchronicity as a coincidence between one's inner subjective experience with the events in the outside world, where a causal connection appears to be lacking, but a meaningful one exists. Nearly all ancient societies had a holistic view of the world that made sense of such coincidences, and it was most clearly expressed when personified in the trickster. In his 2001 book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, the American parapsychologist George Hansen provided the first comprehensive exploration of all the connections between trickster tales and anomalous phenomena, or the paranormal, to use his preferred term. Hansen developed a theoretical framework for understanding these connections that drew heavily from the French-German ethnographer and folklorist Arnold van Gennep and his concept of liminality. Gennep observed that people in tribal societies are often required to move through a transitory in-between stage in order to take on a new social status. He called this stage liminality, for the Latin limen, or threshold. The passage through liminality is often performed in ritual, requiring the individual to endure disorienting and often painful experiences. Importantly, many liminal rituals involve attempts to commune with supernatural beings. The British cultural anthropologist, Victor Turner, coined the term anti-structural to refer to anything that sought to invert or undermine the social hierarchies of the time. Turner saw liminality as a period for scrutinizing the structures and values of a society, and for becoming viscerally conscious of the inequalities that existed within it. Liminal phases, and liminal people, such as shamans, prophets, and mystics, were anti-structural, and they also helped societies to revitalize themselves and to evolve through self-reflection. Hansen argued that mythological tricksters were both liminal and anti-structural, and that all paranormal phenomena shared the same characteristics. All mediate a binary opposite, or bridge two worlds. Legends of Bigfoot occupy the liminal space between primitive apes and modern humans, exhibiting signs of higher intelligence while embodying a crude animalistic form. UFOs cross the boundary between sky and land, or heaven and earth. Ghosts exist between life and death, and psi phenomena manifest between one's subjective experience and the objective physical world. Hansen also observed that paranormal phenomena were boundless, in the sense that they tend to manifest in unpredictable ways, eluding scientific investigation. UFO sightings are often brief and distant, and leave no trace of their appearance. Likewise, cryptids don't leave a lot of tracks, and rarely do we find bones or pelts that could verifiably be attributed to an undiscovered species. Psi phenomena are notoriously difficult to measure in a laboratory setting. Even in successful experiments, effect sizes are small, and skeptics often fail to replicate them. All of these things prevent rationalist scientific investigators from proving their existence, thus maintaining their liminal status. Hansen was also the first to argue that the examples of fraud and deceit so prevalent in most paranormal fields, including alternative healing and mediumship, were actually fundamental to the phenomena in question, just as they were fundamental to the trickster. Instances of fraud help to delegitimize the paranormal in the eyes of Western rationalists, thus relegating these phenomena to the margins of acceptable discourse, and keeping them squarely within the realm of fiction. In other words, fraud helps to maintain the liminal status of paranormal phenomena, while preventing any institutional efforts to investigate them. Like the trickster, the paranormal is inscrutable to the rational mind, and remains beyond the grasp of all established power structures. These kinds of epistemological challenges open up a rift between the liminal figures who champion the paranormal, and the establishment thinkers who keep them at the fringes of intellectual discourse. Thus, paranormal phenomena generate subcultures that reject the authorities of the dominant system, and form new belief systems where authority is grounded in direct, anomalous experiences. Is this the trickster bringing disorder to the world? Adopting the trickster consciousness gives us fresh perspective on all manner of anomalous phenomena. For example, Charles Fort, the founder of anomalistics, compiled dozens of 19th century accounts of frogs, fish, and other organic materials raining from the sky. Looking through the lens of the trickster, we see the contradiction and liminality inherent in creatures of the sea falling from the sky to earth, crossing the boundaries between different realms of creation. There is also something comically absurd about a rain of frogs or fish that would naturally lead one to question the sharp distinction that they had made between heaven and earth, or land and sea. In short, these kinds of rain anomalies lead us to question the boundaries of our world. Other phenomena exhibit playful, taunting behaviors that evoke the spirit of the trickster. Victims of hauntings repeatedly report being baited by some sight or sound, such as a knock at the door, only to investigate and find that there's no one there. Antonio Villas-Boas said that the UFO he saw over his farm darted back and forth to opposite ends of the field every time he tried approaching it. The fighter pilot scrambled to intercept a moving light over Tehran in 1976, said that it flew several miles away from them every time they closed in on it. Investigators who try to capture technical evidence of these phenomena, for example with audio and video recording equipment, often have their devices fail in the presence of anomalous activity. The phenomena invite their witnesses to approach, only to evade a close inspection. Like tales of tricksters, they disrupt our reality, forcing us to wrestle with their meaning, only to leave us with more questions than answers. Beginning in the late 1960s, ufologists and anomalists Jacques Vallée and John Keel argued that UFOs, and even their supposedly alien pilots, were not what they seemed. Whether by technological means or by exercising direct control over our consciousness, ufonauts are able to make themselves and their craft appear in different forms. The visitors use this power to make their appearance conform, somewhat, to the social and metaphysical expectations of their witnesses, so that they appear vaguely plausible to the local culture, while still distinctly alien. In cases where visitors speak with witnesses, they frequently make claims about themselves, their technologies, and their intentions that are obviously absurd or self-contradicting. In other words, the ufonauts and other anomalous entities are shapeshifters, liars, and manipulators, just like the trickster. DMT researcher Rick Strassman noted that many participants in a study he did reported encounters with jovial beings that they referred to as jesters, jokers, or imps. Terence McKenna referred to these beings as machine elves. The freelance writer Sam Wolfe noted how these jester entities exhibit all the behaviors of the trickster, shifting forms while confounding the experiencer by deconstructing their experience of time and space in a carnival-like environment. As the Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin noted, carnival was an important medieval tradition that helped people critique the social order through subversive humor. Wolfe argued that these beings helped people to confront their Jungian shadow through similar subversive humor. People on DMT and other psychedelic substances also tend to report therianthropes, or animal-human hybrids that resemble tricksters. If we accept that anomalous phenomena are manifestations of the trickster spirit, then we can assume that they would have a similar influence on humankind. The American philosopher and theologian, Karl Raschke, claimed that mythological trickster tales perform the service of cognitive deconstruction by making us question our thinking. UFOs perform a similar function in deconstructing culture by making us question metaphysical assumptions and leading us to re-examine our place in the universe. The American ufologist, Martin Kottmeyer, argued that UFO sightings in the US were more common in times when there was a loss of national pride. For example, after the launch of Sputnik in 1957, or after the Watergate scandal in 1973. Whatever the direction of causation, the phenomenon may be the most active when people lose faith in the political and ideological systems by which they're governed. Like the trickster, the UFO phenomenon antagonizes power and nudges towards disorder. Raschke speculated that the ultimate function of the UFO phenomenon was to drive the evolution of consciousness through a constant regeneration of information structures. Hansen argued that the paranormal acts as a sort of counterbalance to the forces of rationalization and bureaucratization described by the German sociologist Max Weber. Following Raschke, Hansen believed that this had a regenerative, revitalizing function. Like the trickster, anomalous phenomena both accompany and stimulate change, helping us to forge a new reality outside of the structures imposed on us by the dominant institutions of our time. In other words, while these phenomena serve to disrupt and destroy the order we have made of the world, the ultimate goal is to help us rebuild a new, better order by freeing our minds to new possibilities. The trickster is an archetype for a wide array of liminal, paradoxical, and anti-structural characteristics that also appear in most anomalous phenomena, and in the lives and social relations of those who try to harness or scrutinize their powers. Like the trickster, anomalous experiences deconstruct our perceptions of the world and provoke the imagination, leading us to wrestle with the boundaries of our existence. The trickster is not just a figure in mythology. He is a force that continues to disrupt our reality and change our ways of thinking. Looking at anomalous phenomena through the lens of the trickster may help us to understand why these phenomena occur and what effect they might have on human society and the continued evolution of our consciousness. Help us keep making these videos by pledging a monthly donation on Patreon, or sending a tip at buymeacoffee.com or PayPal. Think Anomalous is created by Jason Charbonneau. Illustrations by V.R. Lawrence. Music by Josh Chamberland.